Now more than ever, we have an opportunity to be a positive force in the world, to help heal the divide, to treat each other and ourselves with respect. But with so many tools out there, from meditation to physical training, proper nutrition, therapy, and so many others, we all need a little help navigating all the options. Join us as we share in-depth information, insights, and thought-provoking discussions that will help answer your questions about how to stay calm, cool, and connected during these times. Welcome to Calm, Cool, and Connected, your guidebook to peace of mind. Hello, and welcome to Calm, Cool, and Connected. I'm your host, Dr. Elizabeth Bedrick. Most of us are pretty familiar with the automatic reaction and discomfort experienced by hearing noises such as nails on the chalkboard or really loud, disruptive noises. And while this can be really distressing at times, this is generally not something we have to all worry about on a daily basis. However, for individuals who suffer from a condition called misophonia, this extreme feeling of distress is something they experience on a regular basis. Joining us today is Thomas Dozier, master's level behaviorist and the author of Understanding and Overcoming Misophonia. Thomas is here to explain to us what exactly this disorder is and the impact that it has on somebody's daily life. Hi, Thomas. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you, Liz. Good to be here.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us. So tell us a little bit about the work that you're currently doing in this field and with this disorder before we get to the other questions.
So we're providing treatment for misophonia. I am doing research in misophonia as to what it really is. And right now, the major project I'm working on is trying to get a journal article published explaining this theory of misophonia to people.
Okay, and what exactly is misophonia? How would you describe it to the layperson?
So it's a reflex condition where people hear common sounds, typically chewing, sniffing, but it could be birds chirping, it could be anything, or sights, and they have this really intense negative emotional reaction.
And what usually causes this? So from the research that you're doing, where does this develop from?
Well, it develops from Pavlovian conditioning. So if you think of fingernails on a chalkboard, that screech, we shiver, and you go, "Ooh, stop, I hate that sound." But we should say, "Ooh, stop, I hate shivering." With misophonia, it is a learned or an acquired reflex where people will hear chewing or sniffing or tapping or whatever, and somewhere in their body, muscles flinch, or they hold their breath, or they have some other reaction. And then immediately they have this intense, negative, anger, disgust reaction. And the emotions are so overwhelming that people with misophonia usually don't notice the physical reaction. They just have they recognize it as, I hear them chewing and I want to punch them in the face.
Yes. And I had a client, actually, I had a couple client that were a spouse, husband and wife. They came in and she did suffer from misophonia. And that was a lot of their conflict was geared around her reactions to that. Yeah. How frequently do you see that it creates conflict in relationships and influences people in that way?
It almost always creates conflict in relationships. How can you snuggle up with somebody that you hate 3 minutes before because they ate a potato chip? So it's really challenging. It's really challenging.
Yeah, that would absolutely be a struggle. What are some of the triggers of this? So you mentioned that for everybody it's different. What generally causes a trigger for them? And is it something that's happening daily or less often?
Okay, so triggers typically happen daily, but it could be less often. My wife developed a trigger to her chicken squawking. So only on days that they all squawked at the same time was it a problem. But it develops when you hear a sound, have some kind of a negative thought, and you like, "Ooh, that's not right. That's unfair. Ooh, I don't like that." Or my wife was like, "I hope the neighbors don't hear the chickens," and she holds her breath. And so for her, when her chicken squawked, she stopped breathing. And that was a brainstem response.
Right.
So it could be to any sound. It could be any sound or a sight.
And is there a difference between being annoyed by, so a lot of us are bothered by people chewing or heavy breathing, or, there might be things that are just kind of an irritant to a lot of people. Is there a difference between that and being diagnosed with misophonia?
Well, Liz, you know about a clinical condition versus a non-clinical condition, right? So at some level, my wife didn't have clinical misophonia. She just had some sounds she couldn't stand, but they were still misophonia triggers. They just didn't disrupt her life enough to be a clinical condition. So think of it that way, that if you hear a sound and you're like, man, I can't stand that sound, but you only hear it once a month, it's not a big deal.
When is it determined as a clinical condition? At what point? I mean, you and I know from a diagnosis standpoint how that usually works, impacting daily functioning and quality of life. How is this determined specifically that it becomes a diagnosis?
Well, first off, it's not in the DSM and it's not in the ICD. So it's never an official diagnosis.
Got it.
According to that. And it really is just up to the individual as to how much impact it is on their life.
Got it. So tell us, how do people manage this? Besides getting a divorce or living alone in a basement, how do they manage these triggers?
So one of the best things you can do is add noise to your ears. To your world. If you look at the saying, it's so quiet you can hear a pin drop. When it's silent, you hear all the little sounds. So just adding rain or wind or a box fan in the room, or there's great apps for the phone, but adding noise is the number one way of reducing the impact and distress it is on the person.
And is that because it kind of blends this less distressing noise, so it takes away from some of that?
Well, your ear adjusts the volume sensitivity. So anytime it's silent, your ears are cranking up the sensitivity. So sounds seem louder, they're more noticeable, and the fidelity or clarity is perfect. So just adding noise takes that trigger sound down to a softer level. And for something mild like breathing, it completely goes away.
Okay. Yes. And that makes sense. So that would be a great technique to manage it. Is there any treatment that has been discovered as of yet?
Yes, there are some treatments. One of the treatment that I worked on, I call relaxation and counter conditioning therapy, where people do intensive progressive muscle relaxation training to develop the neurological connections to relax on demand. Like we can relax our fingers real easy. We can't do it to our toes or calves. And so doing intensive progressive muscle relaxation and then relaxing around triggers. It's easy to tense up when something irritates you. So relaxing is a counter action to that. So that's one. There's a really good hypnotherapy treatment that's been developed over the last 10 years called sequent repatterning hypnotherapy. And to me, those are the two that have the most practiced treatment.
Okay. And that would make sense. It's similar to a lot of the research around meditation, is that when somebody is really stressed or is easily activated, practicing the meditation helps them. I call it exercise or self-discipline of the mind, that you're really learning, as you're saying, to relax on demand almost.
Right. So one of the differences is in progressive muscle relaxation is it triggers neuron growth so that you can relax on demand. So if you take your hand and go, relax, it's super easy. If you tell your neck, relax, no, it doesn't do that.
Right.
So developing that neurological ability to relax on demand, and then you can relax, right? You have the skill of doing it.
Okay. And then it obviously doesn't have as much of an impact on maybe even relationships or daily functioning when you know how to relax in that way.
Yes. And Liz, when you relax before a trigger and then through the trigger, it actually causes the reflex to decay. So for my wife, who had a breath reflex of holding her breath, she simply did slow, steady breathing when the chickens started squawking, and her trigger went away.
Okay, almost desensitized it by...
Yes, we call it counter conditioning.
Got it.
Because you're trying to get the body doing something different rather than habituating to it.
Got it. Very interesting. Well, Thomas, where can people find more about you if they're listening to this and they're like, oh my gosh, I can relate? Where can they find more information?
Well, the short link is misophonia.org. MisophoniaInstitute.org is the official site, and misophonia.org also works. So give us, come look us up.
Yes. Well, very good. Thank you so much, Thomas. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure, Liz. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. And thank you all for tuning into this episode of Calm, Cool, and Connected. Please make sure to find us on Facebook and Instagram, and also make sure to rate and subscribe to our podcast so that others can discover our content as well. Thank you again for tuning into this episode of Calm, Cool, and Connected.